Hi, I'm James Deaker, the Yield Doctor, and today I'm going to be talking to Alex Roucourt about challenges in assessing advertising uplift in modern advertising and some techniques to address them. Alex has spent many years in digital advertising. He spent time at companies like Meta, Marin Software, and AppsFlyer. Most recently, he and I met when he was working with Dennis Buckheim and the team over at Think Medium, and that's actually where I met him. Currently, he is the VP of Partnerships at WorkMagic, a firm who is developing turnkey solutions for marketing experimentation and measurement. Alex, like me, is from Pacific Island, having spent much of his time in New Caledonia. Alex, I am so pleased that we were able to connect today and discuss how to assess advertising uplift.
Excellent to join you and talk some measurement today. So I'm excited for the chat. Let's do it.
Brilliant. Now, Alex, I want to get into the complexity of the current environment, but I think many of our listeners, like me, have a basic understanding of measurement, but don't understand some of the current challenges. So let's talk about some of the things that have changed. And so let's start simple. If you and I were trying to run a campaign 15 years ago on the open web, when cookies were still the primary currency, how would you manage campaign effectiveness then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to keep it high level to start, basically back then you would use third-party cookies to track all of your media exposures, right? You would tag clicks, views, connect them to your conversions with, I want to say, intentionally oversimplifying things here. You had little impediment to doing this, right? And then the common approach back then was also to give last touch credit across your media channels. So basically, whatever drove the conversion was the closest to the conversion. And so I would say overall, it would have been a fairly rudimentary world when it comes to measurements. There was little focus on incrementality, much less mobile, conversation, if any, conversation about mobile cross-device tracking. So it would have been a much more simple world. And I think from an experimentation standpoint, A/B testing existed, but it was much more manual than today. So, back then, if you think about platforms and publishers, some publishers maybe supported randomized user-level control groups. But the one thing that's maybe the biggest difference with today is that it was, let's call it, easier to tag treatment and control groups with a tracking pixel, and then look at the outcomes like at a user level. And obviously today it's a much different world.
So let's talk about that, because I've got in my mind 3 things that have changed significantly, and you may have others. So let me propose a list of 3 things, and you can react to it. If I compare the current environment to the environment 15 years ago, and one of the biggest changes has obviously been the rise of mobile. And that meant that, as you just actually mentioned, you have to measure cross-ID across different devices. The second thing, in addition to the rise of mobile, is the increased importance of running on closed gardens like Meta and YouTube, where you potentially have less signal and less control. And then the third piece, again, we just touched on it, is the reduction in overall cookie volumes as the major web browsers have implemented some form of privacy controls. And obviously Google has probably implemented the least with Chrome, but those would be my 3. And, would you agree with that list? Are there other things that you would add?
No, I definitely agree with that list. I think, putting it another way, in that time span, so we look back 15 years, right? Fast forward to now, it's like experimentation solutions vastly improved, right? So if you look at the walled gardens that you mentioned, they all have their own sort of experimentation approaches and tools, if you think about Meta and so on. So there's many more options to run an experiment in the market today. But then on the flip side, one, you're probably not going to get full access to the data that you need to run these experiments across the platforms that might make up your media channels. And then the other aspect is that even within the platform, so even let's stick with Meta as an example, due to signal loss, so both on the cookie side, privacy controls, but also losing visibility of device IDs on iOS, you might not even be able to get a clean, test and holdout group at a user level, meaning having reasonable confidence that your holdout group doesn't include or is clean and doesn't include people that shouldn't be in there, to keep it clean. So basically now, you have you have solutions that work well at showing you what works best within the walls of their solutions, which is helpful. But if you're running 10 different media channels, you need to have another approach that's maybe less reliant on signals, so user level signals. And then you need to have a solution that can work potentially across channels. And so I would say with these 3 points that you made, this is essentially what you have to think about now if you really want to have a solution to get a sense of like how your media channels are performing.
Okay, so given those changing dynamics, how either have marketers responded or how are they responding now to try to address those challenges?
Yeah, so basically, I would say marketers have been looking for alternative approaches because they realize all of these gaps, both like the platform silos and then the signal loss aspect. And so basically, it's like a game of figuring out what's the best compromise between a high degree of accuracy if you're trying to test for lift, and then not relying on at least so many user level signals. So one consequence of that is that there's been sort of like a resurgence of older marketing techniques, like media mix modeling is definitely one that's come back to the forefront. And then I want to call out also a renewed focus on statistics and science to make up for gaps in signals. Put in another way, if you can't have access to all of the deterministic signals to figure out exactly where your conversions, your sales are coming from, you want to use a little bit more science to run an experiment that can still get you a fairly accurate view of what's actually driving your business. And so to get a little bit more concrete here, one of the most robust methodologies that's emerged in a world of reduced signals is Geo-Lift testing. And it essentially aims to compare treated versus controlled geographies. So it's at the geo level, so you don't need the user level aspect. And that's how ultimately you estimate incremental impact from any given channel. Essentially, you turn ads or you keep ads running in a portion, a group of regions, and then you turn it off in another comparable group of regions. And then you get a statistically backed reading on the incremental impact of that channel without having to use user level signals. And so
let's go a little bit deeper on that, because I mean, I know that your company WorkMagic's investigating ways of running the campaigns in the similar geographies and looking at the Uplift. Can you go one level deeper and talk me through how that actually works?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few benefits before I get there. One, it's privacy friendly, right? Two, it's grounded in causal inference. So it's basically showing real cause and effect. And then it's scalable across platforms. For instance, if you want to run across all of your media channels, you can have that same approach, that same design, replicated across your Meta, Snap, TikTok, Google, whatever platforms, and then programmatic, other channels, CTV, that works. To answer your question, so essentially what you want to do is specifically, you need to have a read on your sales channels, right? So let's say in our example, I'll take a WorkMagic specific example from our client base. We work with a lot of D2C, direct-to-consumer e-commerce brands. And so these brands, they have multiple sales channels, such as, for example, Shopify or Amazon. Maybe they're selling in retail. Long story short, we want to get access to that order data. And that's essentially what we're going to pair with the platform side metrics, whether that's through API integration with a TikTok, whether it's programmatic, ingesting all of these ad exposures, and then we connect the dots essentially. And so the way you go about this is that we have a team that looks at historical order data, regardless of platforms, regardless of channels, right? And then basically being able to create comparable groups, looking at the historical orders in different geo regions, and then running the media like I described earlier, which, for example, for a platform like Meta, would be running your usual ads without making any changes in a specific group of DMAs, and then pausing that media in the other group, and then looking at how many incremental orders occurred in the group that was actually exposed to ads.
You and I met for coffee a couple of weeks ago. example, and I want to play it back now to make sure that I'm actually understanding how this works. So if I'm running a campaign and half the spend is going on Meta and half the spend is going on Snap, and we run in two similar geographies, and we keep using the term geographies. What are we talking here? We're talking DMAs or states? What's the level that we're talking about?
It has to be ideally at a DMA level, so exactly to your point, in the US, which is a US construct, right? So there's equivalent in other regions. If you would want to run in a European countries, they all have sort of like sub-levels of geo, right, or regions.
Yep.
But if not DMA, zip code also work at zip code level. So for example, just to give you a concrete example, if you're looking at your offline sales, retail sales on Target, for example, if the data can be seen at a store level, right, store address, that can also work.
Okay, and so now to complete the example, I'm running two campaigns. Let's say I'm splitting the spend between Meta and Snap. I'm running in two geographies. My question was around, well, what happens if you're running about the same ad spend in both geographies? And now, having reflected on, I think I understand the answer, which is you try not to have even spend running in both geographies. You want to vary it and potentially change it over time. Is that the right concept?
It's exactly the right concept. In this example that you gave with Meta and Snap, equivalent spend level, I think what would make sense, as a brand, if I put myself in their shoes, is trying to figure out which of the two platforms, if not the two platforms, drive incremental returns, and then I can make, budget decisions, investment decisions accordingly. And so the way you would actually do it is you would look at all of your total orders, you would come up with these groupings that I mentioned before, and then you would basically pick a platform, but you don't necessarily have to. So what I'm really saying here is you could run a Meta lift test, you could run a Snap lift test, but you could also even run a study that has 3 cells, and that's testing for Meta, Snap, and then a control group. And then essentially what you would do is run this lift test for a given period of time, usually would be 3 to 4 weeks, rather, sorry. And then on the back of that, you would be able to figure out whether by pausing the media in some of these regions for, let's say you're doing a meta test, how many incremental orders you got. And then from there, you can make corresponding budget decisions, which might look like, okay, after running the test, ideally on the 2 platforms. So I would do maybe Meta first, Snap then, or the reverse. Then you have a sense of which platforms drive incremental returns and to what extent. And then you're able to say potentially, well, I need to increase my Snap budget because it's actually more incremental than I thought. And then maybe keep Meta business as usual. That's a meta example, but essentially you want to test both platforms so that you're able to make more informed budget decisions and potentially increase the budget or decrease the budget on any of the 2 platforms.
So the example we just talked through, I think I get how that works. As you mentioned, there's a lot more complexity now, and to do what you're talking about requires that the company doing the analysis, in this case, you guys, you have a lot of data scientists, potentially AI. There's a lot of sort of complexity in the analytics that has to go on. So I guess one question is, what do you hear from the advertiser side, from the marketer? Because if we go back to the example we started this conversation with 15 years ago, it was open web, you could run an A/B test and you'd have a sense pretty quickly of how things were shaking out. The model we just talked through, which I think I now understand, is a multivariate model. There's a little bit of trust me. There's a little bit of you need to look at time series analysis. Do you run into challenges where marketers are struggling to interpret the results or believe the results? How's this landing with marketers?
So I think for Geo-Lift specifically, which is only a portion of what we do, by the way, but to your question, there's definitely, put it this way, from a service perspective, other than the tools, which makes it turnkey, you can connect your platforms and so on, which is already a big help. And then facilitating the implementation of the test and the holdout groups, data science is the other big benefit that you would get. Because to your point, or where the question is going, a lot of marketers understand these approaches, right? They understand that there's like ways to better get a sense of how their media is driving performance and incremental performance specifically. But most of them don't have the resources in-house, especially if you're looking at like the mid-market D2C brands, right? They don't necessarily have the resources to do all of this, right? And specifically the data science analysis aspect, both the test implementation, which requires a power analysis like the design, and then also interpreting the results. So that's a big part of what we do. I think some of the concerns that are all fair that we hear from brands when we discuss test implementation, I mean, the most common one would be around having a holdout of any kind, which is basically along the lines of, hey, you're saying all of this is awesome. I do want to get to these results, but also I'm running a fairly tight program, and then I'm concerned about pausing ads, let's say my Snap ads in any given group of regions. Now, the way we usually tackle this is like two-way. It's like one, it's for the greater good. There's going to be maybe a small, minimal impact in the short term, but for you to get a much better read of what this particular channel is actually doing for your business. And then the other aspect is because we are grouping, two equivalent groups or two equivalent sort of like regions or groups of DMAs, we have the ability to play a little bit with like the size of the holdout to make it sort of like to reduce impact. And then there's also the fact that ultimately, if you're looking at total incremental orders, it's often kind of like we're affecting only a minimal number of incremental orders by pausing in some regions. And then the last piece that we say in these situations is also that since we heavy up the span usually in other regions, right, or increase in the test cell, that should make up most of the time for the lost orders from the holdout cells where the ads are not running. So I got into the weeds a little bit here, but that's a common objection. And to your point about like trusting the model, making sure there's like data science representation to walk clients through the methodology, that's always very important.
Alex, this has been so useful. I love these types of conversations, and there's a part of me that's very selfish. I do these because I always feel like I learn so much when I have these types of conversations. Thank you for taking the time. Is there any last closing thoughts that you have, and what is the best way for people to find you?
So we have a WorkMagic website, as you can imagine, which is at workmagic.io. We're very happy to have conversations with even just marketers that are interested in the methodology. If not using our product, talking about our product, sure, but we love to talk measurement. We love to talk data science. We love to get into the details like we did today. So we're always happy to have a great conversation. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And, I'm always happy to pick up the conversation in the DMs and then maybe move it live.
Brilliant. Again, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Cheers, James. Thank you.